why Indigenous people aren't identifying as Indigenous when they are. This is 6 reasons why Indigenous people do not check the box when they are asked if they self-identify as Indigenous. If you're Indigenous and you've had one or more situations where you were filling out a form or a registration application or just having a conversation with someone and you didn't share that you're Indigenous, you didn't identify as me, either First Nations, Métis, or Inuit from Canada, or if you're a tribal person, Indigenous person from the United States, if you have ever not self-identified as Indigenous, but you are, you're not alone, my friend. In the last 3 years, I've learned from over 100,000 Indigenous people and allies about the best ways for connecting with culture and how to get what you want, whether it's knowledge or personal fulfillment or connections and relationship building. This might help you if you are Indigenous and maybe sometimes you don't self-identify. Tell me, please, in the comments if some of these reasons resonate with you. Before this episode starts, I have a small favor to ask from you. 89% of people who watch this channel don't subscribe. So if you've ever liked any of the videos we've posted, if you like this channel, can you please do me a quick favor and hit that subscribe button? It helps the channel more than you know, and the bigger the channel gets, the better we can together make an impact towards Indigenous truth and reconciliation. Thank you and enjoy this episode. The first reason Indigenous people aren't self-identifying as Indigenous when they are is because people don't feel Native enough. Now, what exactly is not feeling Native enough? You can watch this video right here to learn more about what that exactly means. But essentially, you don't feel like you have enough of something, okay? Your identity isn't meeting the expectations of someone. Yourself, someone else, a critical person in your life, society as a whole, people's judgments, right? You feel somewhat like an imposter and you don't feel Indigenous enough in order to self-identify. Maybe you don't have an Indian status tax exemption card. Maybe you aren't connected with your tribal people. Maybe you don't look like an Indigenous person is supposed to look stereotypically. Whatever the reason, you don't feel Indigenous enough or you don't feel Native enough. That is the number one reason why people don't self-ID when they actually are Indigenous. Now, what this means if you are Indigenous and you've experienced this, first and foremost, don't feel alone. Every person has experienced this feeling of not feeling Native enough. I've felt this way many, many, many times, okay? There's definitely a systemic reason for this, and I talk about it in a lot of different videos that I have on the channel, but don't feel alone, okay? So if you're Indigenous and you've never experienced, like, I don't know anyone who's never felt this way before. So 99.99% of us have this feeling of not feeling enough. And it's very, very common, almost guaranteed if you're Indigenous, okay? So don't feel alone and don't be afraid to voice who you are and check off that box if it makes sense for you, but I'll talk about more reasons that might be other reasons why you're not self-identifying later on as we go through all of the 6 reasons. If you're an ally, what you can understand about this information is if you are from an organizational standpoint or on the other side of a conversation and someone is feeling this way of not feeling Native enough or they're not self-identifying and maybe you know that they are, try to have a conversation with them with the knowledge and understanding of imposter syndrome and do your homework around why so many Indigenous people feel this way and maybe they don't have enough percentage background in order to have Indigenous status, like they're a non-status First Nation person or they're Inuit or they're Métis or whatever the case may be. Embracing those opportunities to support an Indigenous person who's feeling inadequate enough to self-identify, reach out and be a friend for that person or at least be an ear. Listen to them and allow them to share how they're feeling. And how you can use this information to help you is continue to learn and continue to understand. Whether you're Indigenous or non-Indigenous, continue to learn and continue to immerse yourself in cultural experiences that are inspiring to you and make you feel good. You might have been exposed to many negative environments with people that are gatekeepers and people that have rules and restrictions for being involved and have put you down and made you feel awful. That's not ideal, but maybe realize that your environment wasn't serving your Indigenous identity well at all and try to seek out those environments like this channel and be able to allow yourself to be surrounded by positive, inclusive environments where you can appreciate your Indigenous identity no matter what percentage it is, and also appreciate other backgrounds and understand that there's interconnection, that there's overlap, there's similarities between cultures, and that it's all beautiful and that we all need to get off each other's backs. Okay, that's number 1. Do you agree with this? Do you not agree with this? There's 5 more to go. So the second reason why Indigenous people don't self-ID when they are afraid of tokenism. Okay, there is a strong fear of tokenism. So what exactly is tokenism? Tokenism is being used for your Indigenous identity and not being appreciated or valued or listened to, and just gaining admission as a token, right? Being used as a token to get into the room because you're Indigenous, but the people that allowed you into the room don't actually care about you and the other parts of your identity or your skills or what you have to say, just the fact that you are Indigenous. Now, why do Indigenous people's fear of tokenism prevent us from self-identifying? It's because we don't want to feel like a token. That's an awful, awful feeling. No one wants to feel like a token, like you only got into the room because of something. You might allow that to be okay temporarily, but long term, it's not sustainable to feel not appreciated. People who are valuing their self-worth and they're really in touch with their feelings, that have a moral compass, do not want to feel like a token. Like it's not a good feeling whatsoever. What does having this knowledge and knowing about tokenism and its impacts on self-identification mean for me? Well, if you are an Indigenous person, understand that if you're feeling these fears about self-identifying because of tokenism, I encourage you to voice those concerns before you are in the opportunity to self-identify, or while you're in the process of having conversations or applying for things. Whenever there's an opportunity to talk about tokenism with someone who it's relevant to, share your experience, share your feelings, okay? Because the only way that these types of things can be improved is in individual conversations, one at a time. If you're an ally and you're wanting to connect with an Indigenous person, even if it's just a conversation, understand that they might not identify or outright share that they are Indigenous with you right away just because of fear, right? Maybe they don't want you to judge them for that or use that knowledge for something that's not good. Just be aware of tokenism and how damaging it can be for someone's self-worth, and learn how to recognize it and support other allies or people who strive to be an ally in preventing tokenism from occurring. Appreciating someone as an individual and the value that they can bring personally as the entire person, instead of just focusing in and utilizing and leveraging the fact that they are Indigenous, right? That's how you can fix that problem. Now, how this can help you is actively listen and learn from Indigenous people that you have in your life to prevent or avoid them from feeling like a token. Have you ever experienced this or seen it happening in your life? Let me know in the comments below. Now, the third reason why Indigenous people don't self-identify as Indigenous, even if they are, is the questions for self-identification don't make sense to them. Now, what do self-identification questions look like? Whether it's like a form, an application, or just a conversation, like those are all different environments or situations where you would self-identify or share your identity, right? I've seen so many different forms or applications that ask identity questions, that ask different questions that are trying to collect information on applicants to understand their background, to understand certain components or characteristics of this person so that they can put them into a category. And sometimes it's yes to check off a box or to weed people out based on their responses to those questions. Now, for this point and this specific reason of not self-identifying because the questions don't make sense to them is in any situation, specifically a form or a conversation, if a question that is being asked to you is worded in a way that doesn't make sense, or you can't answer it in a way that is accurate to how you feel, that it's not correct or it's not worded correctly or a good experience for the person who's trying to respond, right? Now, this is exactly leading into the why. So why these questions not worded correctly prevent people from self-identifying is if it doesn't make sense to them, they're not going to feel comfortable or like it's relevant for them to answer or to indicate or identify with one way or another, right? It's just gonna be a bad user experience for them and they're not gonna answer. I've been on the receiving end of this and it's just doesn't make sense, so you just either avoid it altogether, don't answer, or walk away. Now, this means if you're an Indigenous person and you're being asked a certain question, so if it's in the case of a conversation and someone is asking you a question that doesn't really resonate with you or make sense to you, you can just respectfully correct the person and say, do you mean this? Like, for example, if someone says, hey, what tribe are you from? I could say, well, if you're asking what nation I'm from the Anishinaabe Nation, right? Like, instead of, because when people are asking questions, especially in-person conversations, it's sometimes stressful for the person asking the question. So you don't want to tell them they're wrong and how they're asking the question, because then that makes them feel bad. Who wants to do that? It's better to just softly correct them, encourage them to ask it differently, right? So if you're an ally and you are the person who's putting together these questions, whether it's in an interview format or a form or application or a written format where you're trying to get applicants or form submitters to self-identify, what you can learn from this is to ask the questions in a way that makes sense to your applicants, okay? So if your applicants are definitely people who already identify as Indigenous, maybe ask more specific questions like what nation they're from, what community they're from, or what group they are from, and allow them to have the option to say they don't know, or say that they're going to find out, or that's why they're here. Or it's so valuable to put extra thought and attention into how you're asking questions, because it affects the entire experience for users that are completing it. It says a lot about your organization or your group if you're putting that extra time and energy to make sure that things are worded correctly and worded in a way that will not offend or make people feel like they're in the wrong place. The fourth reason Indigenous people are not self-identifying as Indigenous when they are is because the gatekeeping movement is strong. And there's a fear of being accused as a pretendian. Now, what is gatekeeping? You can watch this video right here to learn all about gatekeeping, but in a nutshell, it's preventing people from being involved or participating or learning about something and watching the gate for certain activities for people who only meet a certain set of requirements. Okay, so that's what gatekeepers are. And accusations of pretendians, there has been an overwhelming amount of people who are fact checking and even making this like their day job to look into, research, and identify people. Sometimes, a lot of times, these are legitimate cases of people who are falsely identifying as being from Indigenous background, but sometimes people are Indigenous and they are identifying with their Indigenous identity, but the gatekeeping is so strong that it places them in a position of, am I Indigenous enough to meet the requirement? Right? So it's a big conversation around that. And that's why I always push inclusivity. Yes, you need to identify and be honest and truthful about who you are, but I don't think it's fair and safe to measure and gatekeep on what percentage of Indigenous bloodline is enough to participate or be involved in certain things. I mean, that's just my perspective. If you are someone who is running a business or running a program and you're an organization and you need to measure the legitimacy of people's identity, I don't envy your job whatsoever, but if that's something that you do, is you have to gatekeep and measure people's identity based on some measure of proof, that's a very, very complex task. Now, what does knowing that gatekeeping prevents self-identification mean for Indigenous people? It means that if you are sometimes feeling not Indigenous enough, even though you are, it's understandable, okay? The gatekeeping is strong and it's really negative and dark, and being accused of being a pretendian is a horrible thing. So if you're feeling awful and having an identity crisis and afraid of self-identifying because of that strong movement, then I have a ton of compassion towards you. Join our community and I can support you in that struggle, because I know it's a serious one and it's really challenging and difficult. And if you're an ally, educate yourself. Educate yourself on these things that are happening that are really affecting Indigenous people in your life. Learn and allow yourself to be equipped with knowledge so that when you're faced with any opportunity where you can support, you have that knowledge in your back pocket to understand and support in conversations and be a really strong ally. How can knowing this help you? Be conscious of the power and the crippling effects gatekeeping has on so many people. Now, the fifth reason that Indigenous people don't self-identify as Indigenous when they really are is the fear of discrimination. Now, what this is a fear of being weeded out of certain opportunities, if it's an application or a conversation where that could lead to an opportunity, being judged or being discriminated against because you're Indigenous, right? I've had many opportunities in my life or conversations that I didn't first share that I was Indigenous because I had the gut feeling that this person might judge me, discriminate against me because of my background. Someone who's really proud and trying to find opportunities no matter what. Sometimes you want to, and most times, you want to get in the door based on your skills and your personality and who you are as a person, not be judged based on your background. So pretty straightforward, but the fear of self-identifying because you might be discriminated against, it's very, very common. I remember having a conversation with my mom about this when I was doing my university applications and asking if this would help my application or hurt my application. And it quickly allowed me to say that, it depends on the person reading it. Truth. Now, how can this help you? If you are an Indigenous person and you're afraid of being discriminated against, and that's why you're not self-IDing, I would look into the group or organization that is asking you to self-ID, and it might help you to feel more confident about your feelings. Always have a conversation, because there's always a human being, a person behind a form or application or questions like that. So if you're feeling fearful of discrimination, get to know the people, and that will help you be a better judge of that specific concern. If you're an ally, you can prevent discrimination by encouraging more people to be allies. So just keep educating yourself, keep learning and participating and supporting Indigenous truth and reconciliation, and that will fight discrimination over time. Now, the sixth reason why Indigenous people aren't self-identifying, if they are, is because there's no reason to. And I think this is a very, very common reason as well. Now, what is a reason to self-identify, right? A reason to self-identify could be if it will potentially increase your chances of someone accepting your application or favorably looking at your information, whether it's a form or something to get in, to get access to something. Or if it's a conversation, the reason of sharing that, maybe it will inspire more conversation or inspire a different route to the conversation, right? It totally depends. So if there is a reason for you to share your identity and share your background, then that is going to help. So if there's no reason to do that, people sometimes aren't going to. Now, why there might be no motivation to self-identify as Indigenous or of any other self-identification on an application or in even a conversation is because if there's no difference one way or another, then why would you, right? You have to think about the reasons why it's important to share something. For example, if you're an organization or a group and you're asking people to self-identify, but you're not doing anything with that information or providing any value to an applicant or to a person who's self-identifying, what is the point? Right? What is the reason for them to actually self-identify? Some organizations that have diversity groups in place or opportunities for people who are self-identifying to be able to get information or get selected or get certain opportunities or access to people that can help them on their journey, whether it's cultural groups or if it's access to information that's more catered to them. This provides people with a reason and a motivation to self-identify. So keep that in mind if you're someone who is trying to get information and trying to learn from applicants or learn from people that you're having conversations with. Give them a reason to share their identity. So that's it for the 6 reasons why Indigenous people don't self-identify when they are. Let me know which of the 6 reasons you think is the most relevant or your favorite, or which one you think is the most important or the strongest. And let me know if you think I missed anything or forgot anything in the comments. I love to read your comments. Thank you very, very much. I hope you have an amazing day, and we'll see you next time.